some time out of your morning to spend some time with me today to talk a little bit about the internal customer. And this is a customer service class, but it's a customer service class that I'm hoping you haven't seen before in terms of the topic, because in my opinion, the internal customer is someone that is often forgotten in the fire service when we're talking a little more globally about customer service. How many people here have read Chief Brunacini's book on customer service? Anybody? His customer service book is sort of the gold standard in terms of customer service. We were introduced to Mrs. Smith in that book and all of the things that we should be doing for Mrs. Smith. And the one thing that struck me, and I've read the book a couple of times, but the one thing that strikes me about that book is that there's one reference in the book to the internal customer. And that one reference is in one sentence that essentially acknowledges that the internal customer exists, and I'll paraphrase, but it says something to the effect of, we must recognize as an organization that we both have internal and external customers to serve, period. And that's it. And that's the last we hear about the internal customer. Who is this internal customer? What are we supposed to be doing for this internal customer? And I think, and that book is 20 years old now, but I think as we look back over the 20 years, the internal customer is someone that we really haven't paid a whole lot of attention to in terms of what are we supposed to be doing for them, and in turn, how does that translate into good things for our agency? I don't think there's an organization that's represented in this room today that doesn't understand or see the value in customer service to the external customer. We do it every day. It's something we do very well. And I don't think anybody can dispute that. But I still think in some areas, and I had a quick conversation before the class, especially areas typically where I'm from in the Northeast, there's a lot of resistance to this. One, resistance to change. And two, there's resistance in some respects to these types of conversations, because there are a lot of attitudes that are still out there that says, well, here's what we're going to do for the internal customer. They're going to come to work. I'm going to tell them what to do. They're going to do it, and then everybody's going to be happy. And I don't think that works all the time. Has anybody worked for that boss who their only leadership strategy is to just tell you what to do today, and that's about it? Has anybody worked for that person? How'd that go? Probably not great. Okay? So, a little background just in terms of how this presentation came to be and the information and the data that kind of feeds this presentation. So as I mentioned, in 2006, I was hired by the Auburn Fire Rescue Department from the outside from another agency. I was serving as a captain on an engine company, had the opportunity to promote up to be a chief officer in another organization, a bigger organization. So it was a great opportunity, and I jumped at it. Now, part of the reason why this opportunity appealed to me is because the organization was in a bit of turmoil, and there was some trouble within the organization. One of the larger complaints that I heard on the floor was, from the members, was that they didn't feel that the officer understood what their role was, and the officer didn't understand what their job was, and that it was more of a dictatorship, and all of those kind of things. So we recognized very early on, I recognized it on day one, but we recognized very early on that officer development was going to be key in our success moving forward. Now, I don't think, just by a show of hands, how many chief officers do we have in the room this morning? Okay, quite a few. And company officers, lieutenants or captains, okay, firefighters, lioness, great. I don't think there's a chief officer in the room that doesn't expect on a daily basis that their folks are going to come in and go out on the street and provide the best possible service to their customers. I think that's the expectation, that's the gold standard, that's what they're looking for every day. But the reality is how do they do that if exceptional within the organization. Do you think there's a bit of a disconnect there? We have an expectation that you as the employee, you're going to go out on the street, you're going to provide the best possible customer service, with a smile on your face, you're going to be nice to everybody, but then when you come back to the firehouse, you're going to be browbeaten by your officer? Are you going to be able to realistically do what we expect you to do if we're not doing the same thing in kind back at the station? I don't think so, and I've lived it. Okay. So part of this program is based on that experience in terms of the way that our old officer staff was interacting with the members. The second part of this is I have an opportunity to teach for a couple of local colleges online, both for bachelor's and graduate level work. And I teach the customer service class, 4 times a year in the cycle, in the semester cycle. I teach customer service 4 times a year. And over the last couple of years, there's one of the weeks, one of the segments is on the internal customer. And it's always my favorite week because it's always the most lively with the group, because it's any Seinfeld fans, it's like Festivus that week. It's all the airing of the grievances in what is going on in their agencies on that week when we talk about the internal customer. And they kind of, they let it fly that, this is ridiculous and that's ridiculous, and we're underpaid, and they're cutting our health insurance, and they're taking this away, and they bring a lot of their union issues, they bring a lot of their internal politics, they sort of bring that, to the table in that week. And I started thinking one day, about 2 years ago, I started thinking that there's got to be more to this. There's something deeper here. Yes, okay, we're complaining that, we're not paid enough, and that they're going after our pensions, and, that they're cutting health insurance and all of these things. But so we're kind of scratching the surface. So 2 years ago, I said to the class, I'm going to pose you a question, and I want you to answer this question. I said, what is, if you had a dry erase board and you could wipe the slate clean, I want you to give me the top 5 things that the agency could be doing to better serve you. So give me the top 5 things that the agency could do to better serve you as an employee. And everybody started submitting their responses. So what I did was, I kind of took all the responses and I was able to kind of categorize them. So 4 people may have wrote something different, but it kind of fell under the same category. So I kind of boxed it all together. And that's how the first top 10 list was created. Well, it's been a couple years, it's been 2.5 years now. And I typically have about 30 students in each class. I do the same exercise. So I've had a couple of hundred firefighters from across the country answer these questions. And I started to see a trend that after 2.5 years worth of asking these questions, I wasn't plugging any new information into any of the boxes. So it got me thinking to say, we've got a couple hundred firefighters from across the country, which is a good demographic, it's a good sample survey. I'm asking them the same, I'm asking them to give me the same question, the same 5 responses, and I'm not plugging anything new into the boxes. And the top 10 list has essentially looked the same for 2.5 years. So what does that say? I know what it says to me. It says that your average firefighter, company officer, chief officer, right? So there's a lot, even in the course, it ranges from firefighter to chief, volunteer to career, across the country. What it says to me is that we all have the same problems. We all have the same issue. And in reality, if we all could write down on the board the top 5 things, if I had you do the same exercise, and we'll obviously take a look at the list at the end, but I don't think your answers are going to be really any different than their answers. And the one thing that they all had in common when you look at the top 10 list, they're all leadership issues. They're all leadership problems. It's all things that the leadership, from the company officer to the chief, as an organization, as a leadership team, they fall on us to do. All right? Now, this is this first slide, there's a couple slides that I want to talk about here quickly. And these two slides that I'm going to talk about came from a study that I did in Massachusetts 2 years ago. I was doing a more global kind of research project on customer involvement and how organizations are involved in their customers. And what I was trying to figure out ultimately was, do we handle customers differently between fire calls versus EMS calls? And the short answer is yes, but I don't want to get into I'm not going to get into the details of the study. But there is a difference. And I asked, again, I sampled about a third of the organized fire departments in Massachusetts. So it was about 110 fire departments that I surveyed. And again, it was a range of firefighters to officers, I didn't do chiefs. I didn't want the chiefs to do it, but officers and firefighters. And I had, only one member per department, so they weren't, 5 people weighing in on a single department. So it represents about a third of the fire departments in Massachusetts. And it was a total of 10 questions, but there were 2 questions that I asked that specifically relate to customer service that I think kind of drive a point home here today. Is I said, do you get the feeling that customer service is important to your department? And the answer was not surprising to me, right? The results were not surprising, because it goes back to what I said in the beginning, right? We take, as firefighters, a tremendous amount of pride in what we do on the street, the way that we handle customers, the things that we can do for them. We take a lot of pride in that. So the answer was not really surprising to me. It was around 70% said, yeah, we feel that customer service is important, to our organization. We had some that just flat out said no, maybe a little over 10%, and then we had a certain faction that said, I don't know or never discussed. Well, I hate to tell you, if you don't know or if you've never heard it discussed, it's not important to your organization, right? So it's safe to say that we can slap those into the no category, which would bring it a little over 20% that said, now we don't feel it's important. All right. The next question that I asked was, does your department provide customer service training to its members? Again, I wish I could say that this number was not shocking to me, because it's not, right? But almost 80% said no. Again, same rules apply. 20% said they don't know. Well, if you don't know if they provide the training, they don't provide the training. So you can put it into the no category, which pushes it around 95% of the organization said, no, our department doesn't provide us training. Do you see the fundamental disconnect here? How can we have something that we take so much pride in our organizations, and it's really the backbone of what we do? We take a lot of pride in helping people. How can we have so much pride in something, but on the other hand, provide our employees that are going out on the street, that we've already sort of all agreed to, that the expectation every day is to go out and provide exceptional customer service to the best of our abilities? How do we do that when we've never trained them how to do it? It's the equivalent to me handing you an air pack and saying, we expect you to use this air pack appropriately and properly, but never training you to do it. We expect you to go out and drive the apparatus safely and in a professional manner, but not training you how to do it. It equates to the same thing. And again, I ask the question, when we have those incidents, which are rare, right, and I'm sure your organization is no different than mine, right, the incidents of complaints that we have, customer service related, are rare. But as an organization, when we do get complaints that maybe people weren't treated appropriately, should we be shocked with this kind of data? And I'm not going to ask you to show, a show of hands, but think about it within your own organizations. Are you formally training your employees in proper customer service techniques, which do exist? Or are we just rolling the dice and hoping that common sense prevails and they know what to do? I think in most cases that's what we do. But let's flip this to the internal customer. And again, why I showed you these slides was it's the same thing with the internal customer if I was to pose the same question, right? Are we training our fire officers how to appropriately deal with people, more importantly, the staff that's under them, in a customer service way? Or are we just rolling the dice hoping that common sense will prevail and we'll do that? Well, based on my experience when I got to the organization in 2006 and based on over 200 college students from across the country, it's not working. The rolling the dice piece isn't working because our company officers don't know how to handle people. When the bell rings and they jump off the truck, they're rock stars. They know what to do. But the majority of the time, what are they dealing with? What kind of issues are they dealing with? Somebody said? Personnel issues, right? People issues. But we don't, we don't train them enough to deal with the people issues. Right? So who are the external customers? Who would you consider to be external customers? Internal customers. Every person in the organization. Anybody that may not directly be a sworn member of the organization that could be considered an internal customer? Who? Administrative staff? Family? That's a great one. One that's often forgotten. It's anyone with a stake in the organization. It's your DPW mechanic. If your community happens to have a facilities division that maybe does your station repairs. Again, family. Anyone with a stake in the organization is an internal customer. Do each of those categories that I mentioned have a different set of needs? And should they be handled the same or should they be handled differently? Can we handle a family member, a spouse, or a child of a member the same way we handle the member? No. So that's where training is key. We have to first recognize who the stakeholders are and then figure out each one of their specific needs and how as an organization we can tend to them and take care of them, especially in times of tragedy. We're great at planning funerals, and we're great at executing that up until the day, right? But do we have a plan in the organization moving forward the day after, and how the organization is going to keep that family in there, in the family? We love to say never forget, but I know a lot of organizations and a lot of disgruntled families because the day after the funeral, the phone stopped ringing, right? So those are the kind of things that we have to think about when we think about the internal customer. So why is it important that our employees feel valued?
Human nature, everybody wants to feel valued.
Everybody wants to feel valued, right? From the top down. As the chief, I want to know that my manager thinks that I'm doing a good job and that the elected officials think that I'm doing a good job. My officers want to know that I think they're doing a good job, and in turn the firefighters want to know that their officer thinks that they're doing a good job. Everybody, human nature, everybody wants to know that they're good. Now, we often say, and it's been said a couple of times throughout this conference, this question's been posed and I'll pose it. What's our most important asset in our organizations? Our people, right? I always like to add a little caveat to that. I like to go one step further. Good people is what is our most important asset, right? Because we know, and all of us here, we have good people in our organizations, and we have people that if they disappeared tomorrow, no one would care. Okay? So we have to pay attention to the good people and make sure that the good people feel valued. And the bad people, and I don't want to call them bad people, but maybe the people who are underperforming, we need to come up with a plan for them. We either need to get them up to an area or a position where they can be productive and they can feel valued in the organization, or we need to manage them out. Those, in my opinion, are really the two choices that we have. But how many organizations just accept the fact that, 28 more years, and then he's gone. 28 more years. Is that really a plan? I don't think that's a plan. The plan should be train them up or manage them out. And where should we hopefully find out that these people aren't going to work? Hopefully in the probationary period. In my opinion, the probationary period is the most underutilized tool in the fire service. The most underutilized tool in the fire service. Now again, we have to sort of take into consideration and make some assumptions, and I can make this assumption, that the majority of the people in my agency and your agencies are good people that come to work every day wanting to do the right thing. Very few people, right? And even the underperformers. In my heart of hearts, I like to believe that they don't actually show up every day saying, I want to see what I can screw up today. And I want to, I want to do a bad job. I don't believe that they come to work with that intent. I think sometimes they come to work and they say, well, I'd like to see who I can mess with today, and I'd like to see who I can get cranked up in the station. I think those kind of things. But again, when the bell tips and they go out onto the street, even the underperformers want to put their best foot forward. But we have to take into consideration that the people that we're bringing into our organizations on day one, that they've been vetted and that they deserve to be there. And I'll simply just ask the question for you to think about as you leave the room today and as you leave the conference. What does your hiring practices look like? Okay? How aggressive are they? What kind of process are we running them through? Are we doing real background investigations, or do we have the illusion of background investigations? Because there's a difference. Okay? Deputy Wolford from Bozeman sat on the panel on Tuesday, the discussion panel. And I hope everybody had an opportunity to catch that. And she made a comment that the employees that we're hiring today are different than employees that we've been hiring in the past. And she made the comment that we're starting to see recruits, right? When you do the math, we're starting to see the new firefighters that are coming into the service today weren't born on 9/11. I'm going to take that one step further. Okay? Everybody here familiar with the Worcester coal storage fire in 1999? Killed 6 Worcester firefighters. Whether you know it or not, whether you realize it or not, that fire was the most significant fire event in the last 100 years that changed the face of the fire service in the way that we train and the way that we operate. That fire. That fire is what brought us greater accountability, heavier focus on rapid intervention teams, heavier focus on thermal imaging technology, not just in the city of Worcester or the suburbs that surround it or the state of Massachusetts. Nationwide, that fire brought those issues to the forefront. Well, in 1999, the kids that were born in 1999 are 18 years old today, graduating high school, maybe wanting to pursue a job in the fire service, and providing they get one in the next couple of years. Let's say they land a job at 20, 21. In most organizations, you have to be on the job for 3 years before you're eligible to promote. So it's conceivable that in the next 6 to 7 years, you could have a fire officer in your organization riding the front seat that either wasn't born or was born shortly after the most significant event that changed the face of the fire service. Is that in line with what the deputy said on Tuesday in terms of we're hiring a different type of employee today? Not only sort of fundamentally in the way that they think, but they don't understand the history, and I'm not talking the history of, from 1630 when Boston implemented, no more, thatched roofs. That's not the history I'm talking about. I'm talking about history that happened 18 years ago. Right? What are we doing as an organization to make sure that these new people that are coming in have that knowledge, have that history of kind of where we've been and where we've come in a relatively short period of time. And we've talked about that a lot over the last couple of days, that the technology that's out there, it's outpacing us quicker than we can keep up. Right? But it starts with bringing good people into the organization. Because again, in order for us to carry out our mission of providing the best exceptional, customer service that we can, we have to make sure that we're bringing people into the organization that are capable to do that. If we don't bring in people who are capable to carry out our mission, do we have any hope that that's going to get done? No, I don't think so. So who's responsible for employee morale in your organizations? Company officer?
Individual employee.
The individual employee, right? I'm going to be the first to tell you, so maybe some of you have heard this before, maybe this is news to some of you, but contrary to popular belief, not everything in an organization is the chief's fault. I'm not sure if you guys heard that before, right? But not everything is the chief's fault. The individual, first and foremost, has a responsibility for their own morale. Absolutely. Second to that, it's the company officer. And I've had this conversation, especially when I was the operations deputy. I had this conversation with my company officers all the time. Chief, we've got morale issues on the floor. What are you going to do about it? What am I going to do about it? I'm going to lunch. What are you going to do about it? Do I interfere? And the question that I ask my officers, other than in the morning when I lay out what is to be accomplished today, if there's special projects or something like that, can you explain to me how I interfere with your day at all in terms of your group dynamic and what goes on with when you do your training and when you do all of these other things that are going on in the day? Can you tell me how I interfere with that at all during the day? Well, you don't really. So then how am I responsible for the morale issues on your group? If the morale issues on your group are at a higher level of things that are maybe above your head, okay, you still have somewhat of a responsibility to manage that. But if the majority of the morale issues on your group are within your control and they're complaining about things that you have control over, I hate to tell you, man, that's not my problem. I'll help you try to solve it. I'll try to give you some solutions and some strategies on how we can do it. But it's not my job to fix your morale problem. Right? The company officer is most responsible, outside the individual, in the organization, the company officer is mostly responsible for the morale of the group because they have control over the day-to-day. Right? The problem with that, though, is that unfortunately many officers, they don't recognize their role within the organization. And this is the question that I pose to you as leaders in your organizations. What are we doing as an organization to define and clarify what their role is and what the expectations are? Has anyone ever had a conversation with a new company officer and you looked at them directly in the eye and said, you are responsible for the morale on your group. That is your role as a group officer. If you've never had that conversation or if that sentence has never come out of your mouth, it probably should. It probably should. Along with a whole host of other things. Right? I call it the magic wand theory. We have a magic wand in the fire department that the day you promote, you take the test, you find out you passed, you find out you're getting promoted, you go to City Hall, you get your badge pinned on you by your family, you walk out, you show up to shift the next day, we pull out the magic wand and we go. And we somehow miraculously think that you know what to do today on day one. And the truth is that they don't. one of my officers, I'm very blessed today. In 11 years, a lot has changed, and that's a great thing. And I'm very blessed today to have an outstanding command staff. I have 11 officers. They're all great. They're all moving, towards the process here within CPSE to become designated. I'm proud of them for that. Again, a lot's changed in 11 years. And one of my lieutenants, who's shortly going to be promoted to captain in the next month or so, he's got a great story that he tells, that on his first day showing up to work as a lieutenant, I walked in and I shook his hand. I said, "Hey, congratulations." "Oh, thank you." And then I looked at him and I said, "Well, I'm your new best friend, because those guys already forgot your name." And he tells that story, that there is some truth to that. The day that you show up as the company officer on the first job, you're no longer the firefighter sitting around the kitchen table, involved in the same conversations and jokes that you were the day before. You have a new role. And what are we doing as an organization to explain your role, explain the expectations that the chief has for you? And I'll go one step further. Do we have some sort of a formal orientation program for them? How many people have a formal orientation program for new employees that come into the organization? Okay. How long, just throw out some numbers, how long is that orientation? 1 day? Anything longer than that? What is yours?
Ours takes a couple of months to go through a series of interviews with the entire organization.
Yeah, but once hired in day one, do they have sort of a process that they go through?
They do.
Okay.
They do.
It depends on the size of the class that we hire.
Yep.
If it's large enough, we'll break it out and it goes through at least 4 weeks of orientation.
Okay.
And then if it's not, it's all job task related, so they have a job book they've got to
Yep.
complete. And then if it's a small group, we'll do on-the-job training, assign them to a shift, but the company officers have to walk them through that period of time.
Great. I have a 2-week orientation. Every new career person that comes through the door, they work on Monday through Friday for 2 weeks. And it's a formalized process, and we teach them about the department. We show them around town, we take them to the town hall, we do live fire training, we orient them to SCBA, we do all of these things. And that sort of makes sense, right? I don't think anybody in this room would sit here and say, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." We're bringing a brand new guy into the organization, doesn't know anything, we're going to train him up for a couple of weeks. How are our company officers any different, other than already knowing where the town hall is and knowing what equipment we have? But do they know anything about their new job, other than what they read in the textbook? Especially, the officers in the room here, think about your first day. Were you prepared on day one? Fully? Did you know on day one what you know today? So why are we doing the same thing with our officers? Why don't we invest the same 2-week Monday through Friday orientation to bring our officers up to speed so they know their role and they're more prepared to do their job? We do it with the new employees. We have to consider our officers new employees in that respect. And we have to take into consideration that they don't know everything. I'm the chief of the department. I don't know everything. That's why I'm here, learning from my peers. That's why I have a Rolodex. I still have a Rolodex. It was a gift from the old chief who didn't use a computer, but man, that thing comes in handy. But that's why I have a Rolodex of numbers of people that I can call and say, I've never dealt with this. I need some help. Right? So if that happens at the chief level, you better understand and recognize that that's going to happen at the lieutenant level down here on day one. And we also have to admit and recognize in some respect that maybe many of the problems that we have within the organization in terms of how the internal customer is treated is because of a lack of leadership, because the officer doesn't fully understand their role. Because that transition from firefighter to officer is a huge step. It gets a little easier as we climb the ranks, not a ton, because there's still different challenges. But you all know that have made that jump. Firefighter to officer, that's the biggest. And we have to dedicate and focus time to make sure that we're training up our command staff the right way. Our officers need to understand that on day one, our expectations of them much like our new employees, when we say our expectation of you is to go out into the community and provide the best possible customer service that you can do. Our officers need to understand that every day you come in here, you must display self-discipline, inspiration, involvement. You must accept feedback from your members because that's how we're going to grow and get better. You have to be decisive. You have to walk the walk, right? You need to be a mentor, a learner, a coach, a good communicator, a teacher, but more importantly, a student. Because the only way that you're going to grow in this job and continue to grow in this job is to pay more attention to the last right than anything else. That should be laid out in terms of what your role is as an officer. Everyone in this room, I'm sure, has read a NIOSH report. Everybody's familiar with them. At the end of a NIOSH report, what are you looking at? What's the last section of the NIOSH report that we're looking at? The recommendations, right? Will everybody agree that if I took 100 NIOSH reports and started on the left side of the room and ended on the right side of the room, and we lined them all up on the table and we flipped to the recommendation section, would everybody agree that probably 85 to 90% of the recommendations are all the same? Right? We found no new ways to kill firefighters. Okay? They're all the same. This is just a snippet of some of the recommendations from a NIOSH report. And I tried to pick real simple ones. Okay? Lack of a sound understanding of fire behavior and extreme fireground dynamics. Lack of proper size-up, that risk versus gain early in the hour. Lack of understanding of extreme fire effects on lightweight construction. Lack of existing standard operating procedures. Lack of use of an ICS system. And lack of sufficient training. Who's responsible to make sure that these are done? Let's assume that the chief, right, chiefs are always responsible. But let's just take the day-to-day. Riding in the front seat of the engine. The officer, right? The company officer is responsible at the end of the day to control all of these issues. If we don't understand fire behavior in what's going on in that building as the first new company, and we don't do a proper size up, and we don't recognize that it's a lightweight construction building, and we don't follow our own proper procedures, and we don't establish a forward command, at least in the beginning, and I haven't spent time during my shift making sure that the crew is trained and that they understand how to use the equipment on the truck, as the company officer, that's my fault. Yes, as the chief of the department, yeah, you certainly got some blame there as well. Because as the chief of the organization, you should make sure that your company officers are doing these things. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the company officers that we're promoting have the ability to do these things. Because if we have people riding the front right seat that don't have the ability to do these things, they should not be in the front right seat. And that's where it's your fault as a chief, if you allow it to continue. Right? Your job as the company officer is to be the leader. At the end of the day, you have to be the leader of the organization. Because those responsibilities that were outlined on that NIOSH slide, that's something that's not to be taken lightly. And it's not to be taken by someone who feels it's their turn or that they're senior, right? We have to look really hard today in 2017 as far as how we are choosing the formal leaders in our organizations. And I referenced it already a little bit with our new hires. What are we doing? Do we have a real hiring process and background vetting process or the illusion of one? Same rules apply on the company officer side. Do we have a real promotion process where candidates are tested, vetted, whether that's through a formal assessment center from an outside company, an assessment center that you put forward within your own organization, something, it doesn't matter. But do we have a real process where we are hiring the best candidate who is able, has the knowledge, skills, and abilities to not only perform and make sure that those things on that NIOSH list are happening, but can truly lead the organization? Remember when I said in the beginning, contrary to belief, not everything is the chief's fault? Well, this is one that is. If you do not have a real hiring process for promotions, where we vetted candidates to make sure we're putting the best person in the seat, well, that is your fault. What's a professional? We love throwing that word around, right? Professional firefighter. In Massachusetts, we have the professional firefighters of Massachusetts. Right? We love throwing that word professional around. But what does it mean by definition? Right? Underneath are two different definitions out of Webster's dictionary. Someone with special skills and knowledge, and it's someone who's paid for their occupation. I necessarily don't buy into this one completely, because I know a lot of volunteer firefighters that could run circles around professional firefighters. So just because you're paid for your job doesn't make you a professional. Right? So I don't necessarily buy into that, but I certainly buy into that it's someone with special skills and ability. And I certainly buy into the third part of the definition, that there's a high standard that you expect from a person in a particular profession. That's what makes them professional. We are in one of the most trusted professions in the world. All right? The public has high standards that the people that we are deploying to their homes have been properly vetted, have been trained, will be led, and that we are going to bring some successful outcome to their problem. In emergency services, professionalism demands placing the interests of the public ahead of their own. Setting and maintaining standards and competencies and being accountable to the public. Okay? This statement embodies what a fire officer should be. That's what I love about my command staff. Is my command staff every day puts their own interests aside and does what's right for the organization, even though that may be in conflict. And anybody that was in the room during the last session, right, we talked about that. It doesn't necessarily mean we all have to agree, but we have to be professional enough to put it aside for what's best for the organization. But even if my officers don't necessarily agree with that that's maybe the route that we should be taking, they certainly never put their own interests in front of the interest of someone from the public, one of our citizens. And that's what a leader is. And those are the people that need to be in the front seat of our truck. Those are the people that our young firefighters and our older firefighters need to be looking at as role models and people hopefully to emulate in the future. I'm not going to read them to you. You can see them. But these are the traits of a professional. And when you're in your hiring process, when you're looking to promote an officer, we should be taking this list and we should be looking at their employee evaluations. And what have we said about this person? What has their officers said about this firefighter over the years? Do they embody any of these things? Because if they don't, we shouldn't be looking to promote them. Why would we pin a badge on someone that doesn't possess any of these traits and we know it? Why would we do that? Competency standards. That's the whole point of this conference, right? To talk about professional competency. That's the whole point of designations and being accredited, right? Competency standards means that we always and consistently get it right above the expectations of the customer. And that's what I said in the very beginning. That's what we strive for. That's the gold standard. Right? There's two types of a professional that need to make that happen. There's one that has personal initiative, and I'm preaching to the choir on that one because you're all here. Okay? You fall into that category. But then there's professional in the social and the cultural interactions that we have with the public. And again, can these two be in conflict? Yeah, and this is really more of an attitude thing. We can have a professional, someone who does take personal initiative, but may not be great with people out on the street. Those are the things that we have to understand and recognize before we promote. It's not something that can't be corrected, but it's something that has to be recognized. Being professional is a total package thing. It's not just a, well, I like this one, but not this one. Okay? So we're going to get into the top 10 list. So again, based on the comments over the last 2.5 years or so, these are the reasons, these are the biggest reasons that the employees don't feel valued by the organization. Right. Number 10. We have to establish a culture where it's okay not to be okay, but not okay to stay that way. And what I mean by that, and we actually talked about it again, it was discussed at the panel forum on Tuesday, is the issue of PTSD and mental health issues. Has anyone here ever not seen a firefighter in a bad mood? If you haven't, please stick around after. I'd love to meet you. Maybe get an autograph. Right? We all have bad days. And that's okay. I have bad days. You have bad days, right? We all have bad days. We try our best not to bring those into work. At least that's what professionals do. But sometimes that's not always the case, because there's a lot of external forces that we just don't have control over, especially in our personal life, right? Maybe one of our members, maybe their marriage is falling apart. Maybe they have sick children at home. Maybe they have some other, a sick in-law or somebody that has to move in, which is going to disrupt the family dynamic. That's part of your job as a chief, and that's part of your job as a company officer, is to understand and know what's going on in the lives of your folks. You have a responsibility to do that. You need to know what makes your people tick. If you don't know what makes your people tick, how do you manage them? How do you lead them? If you don't know anything about them personally and what's going on, how do you lead them? I don't think you can. So you have a responsibility, just shy of prying, but you have a responsibility to be engaged and talk to people about what's going on in their life. Hey, how are you? We have to understand and recognize that people are going to come to work and they're going to have a bad day. And that's okay. And maybe on that first day we say, just stay away from Joe today. I don't know what's up, but just steer clear. And we work around Joe. Now, if Joe's not performing in the street, and Joe's not being the rock star that Joe normally is, all right, maybe we have to intervene a little quicker, or maybe we got to send him home because we're not going to put the safety of the crew or the public in jeopardy if he can't do the job. But if it's just that Joe doesn't want to talk to anybody today, but he's out performing, okay. I'm going to let that slip. We'll let that go today. On day 2, Joe comes in. Joe's still in a bad mood. Today's the day as an officer that I try to pull Joe aside and I say, so what's going on? Everything all right? I really don't want to talk about it. Okay. Nothing I can do? I don't want to talk about it. Okay. Just know that I'm here for you if you want to talk. If there's anything you want to talk about, don't feel shy. Thanks. And then we let Joe go about his business. Again, keeping an eye on Joe, make sure that he's still performing his job, make sure that he's not putting anybody in jeopardy, but if Joe just doesn't want to talk to us today, fair enough. Day 3. Joe, what's up? I don't want to talk about it. Okay, well, we really don't have that option today. We need to know what's going on, because this is clearly a change. It's a change in Joe. Joe normally doesn't come to work and not want to talk to people. How many times did we hear, or we heard on Tuesday in the forum, we heard them say that, especially when it comes to firefighter suicide, that, well, what if Joe killed himself? And then in the aftermath, everybody's looking, going, oh, I knew something wasn't right. He came in and he wasn't talking to us for 3 days, and that's not Joe. But we just ignored it. It's a delicate balance, because again, we all have personal lives. We don't want to pry. People are entitled to be in a bad mood. People are entitled to have problems. So I'm not suggesting that on day 1 we shake Joe down, we put him in a room, we shine a lamp in his face, and we say, you tell me what's going on. But it falls in line with, we got to establish a culture where it's okay not to be okay, but it's not okay to stay that way. And I think that if we establish this as a culture, and people in the organization know that it's okay for me to come in and not talk to you for a couple days because I'm in a bad mood, but I know at some point I'm going to be called out on it, and it's the expectation that I'm going to have to tell somebody what's going on and what the problem is. If that's known up front, that that's the culture in your organization, sometimes it makes these conversations a little easier to have, because they know at some point they're going to have to tell you what's up. But the second piece is important, that it's not okay to stay that way, because if as an organization we allow it to stay that way, now what happens to the organization? What happens to the rest of that group? We're bringing them down, right? Now the next day, not only is Joe not talking to everybody, but Mike's pissed off because Joe's not talking to anybody, and now Mike's not talking. And then tomorrow, Tess is aggravated with the whole thing. Right? So if we don't deal with it, it's got the potential to spiral out of control. And with what we know today, in 2017, about PTSD and firefighter suicide, this one is huge. And we can't ignore it. This happened to a community a few miles east of us this past summer. Very, very similar situation that I just explained to you. Came to work 3 days distant. Day 4, didn't show up to work. And they found him dead in his shed from carbon monoxide asphyxiation from his lawnmower. And the strategy was, just give him some space. Okay, this is real. The number of firefighter suicides is rising at a rate in numbers that we've never seen before. And again, it's a tricky balance, because we can't force people to be in good moods. We can't there's a lot of external factors that happen. But as a leader, as an officer, we have to know how to manage this. Out of anything that's on this list, this is the most sensitive of personnel issues that we're going to have to deal with, which are those that are external, that may not be brought on by the organization. Because as an organization, we have very little control over it. And if not handled appropriately by the leader, it's the one that has the potential to blow up in your face more than any of them. And it's the one that has the potential for that member to hold a grudge if you messed with their family, or you didn't handle a family situation correctly. It's the one that they have the potential to hold a grudge on for the next 20 years until they retire and never forgive you for the way that you handled that situation. So it's a very tricky situation. However, an important one that can't just start tomorrow, the day that Mike's not talking. We have to go back to our organizations, and we have to establish this as a culture when times are good. And we have to highlight the importance of firefighter suicide and PTSD. And we have to talk about these things in our agency. And we have to talk about and print this up and put it on your wall to say, in this organization, we're going to establish a culture where it is okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay that way. And know that if you're not doing okay, we're going to give you some space, but it's a real short window before we start asking some questions. Number 9, provide a healthy and safe work environment. Sounds simple enough, right? Anyone in this room want to work for a cowboy? Raise your hand. I don't see a lot of hands flying up, right? Listen, at the end of the day, we all have the same goal. We want to go to work, we want to have some fun, we want to do some calls, and we want to go home to our families. That's the goal, right? As an organization, chief officers, company officers, we have an obligation and a legal responsibility. Let me say that again. An obligation and a legal responsibility to make sure that our employees are provided a healthy and safe work environment. Any states here, OSHA states, that OSHA oversees your departments, right? Very similar sentence is in OSHA, okay? Even non-OSHA states, we have that obligation to provide a healthy and safe work environment. As a leader, that means professional development, training, not being a cowboy, right? No one wants to work for a risk taker. So as a leader, we have to make sure that we're providing that environment, not only on the emergency scene, but in the station as well. If there are things in the station that, whether it's environmental concerns because, maybe we don't have a Plymouth vent system or some other type of capture system, or, maybe the station's falling apart and it's creating an unsafe environment. That's your job as an officer to bring those things up the chain and try to get those things fixed. Do you think a staff that recognizes that their officer advocates for their needs, do you think that that's valued by the employees? Yeah, I think so. I think so. Be professional and lead by example. It goes back to that slide that was a little ways back that said, walk the walk. I know a lot of guys that don't practice what they preach or walk the walk. And at the end of the day, they're hypocrites. And one thing about firefighters, we are perceptive. And we know when someone is not walking the walk. And we know when someone is slinging some bull. And that, it's do what I say, not as I do. And that doesn't fly as a company officer. And you're not going to have a lot of respect from the crew when that's the attitude that you're taking. So we have to be a professional, a constant professional, and lead by example all the time. We are always on stage, not only as firefighters when we go out on the street, right? I long for the days when you could go do a car accident and somebody wasn't standing on the sidewalk doing this, right? I long for those days. But do you think our own people are not paying attention to what's going on and what you're doing as an officer while you're in the station? Well, you bet your butt they are. And again, the higher you climb the ranks, you don't think my staff is watching me constantly, the moves that I'm making? Not necessarily in a negative way, but they're watching. They're watching. And if I do something that violates policy, or if I do something that contradicts something that I've told them in the past in terms of certain expectations that I want them to move forward, you bet that that's going to come back to bite me at some point. Right? Listen to your staff. This was probably, and I'll say that this list isn't ranked by, it's not like the top 10, the most popular. It's in a random order. But I will tell you that listen to your staff was probably overwhelmingly the number one thing. And in 2.5 years, it's been on every person's list 100% of the time. Listen to your staff. So what that says to me is that the majority of our firefighters feel like they don't have a voice within the organization. that their company officers or their chiefs are not listening to them. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I'm not even the smartest guy in my building. The reason that we have success today, and the reason that we've been able to turn the organization around over the last 11 years, is because I have the ability to sit down and look at a group of people, whether it's my command staff or the department as a whole, at a department meeting, right, that would look similar to this, and say, all right, so what are we doing well, and where are the areas that we need improvement, and what are the things that we're not doing today that we want to be doing as an organization? And taking that in, taking all that information in, put it on the whiteboard, and see what's feasible, what's not feasible, right? You know how many fire chiefs I know? I haven't ridden in an ambulance in 11 years. It's been the greatest 11 years of my life. Do you know how many fire chiefs I know still go out today and make decisions on purchasing ambulances and purchasing stretchers and purchasing equipment without any input from the people who are going to be riding that ambulance tomorrow? Do you know how many chiefs I know that do that? Too many. Too many. Right? We just went to, this past summer, we just went to those Stryker, the auto load system. I looked at my staff and I said, kind of a funny story, because 11 years ago when I got here, I wanted to buy power stretchers and the union said, nope, they fought it, they didn't want it. Okay. Right. 11 years later, I said, all right guys, we're moving on, we're beyond this. Power stretchers, I'm going in the ambulance, I want the auto load systems in the ambulance, you pick the vendor. Stryker has them, Furno has it, I don't care which one. You pick, you tell me what you want, I'll write the check. Right? Union committee went off, they came back, this is what we want, wrote the check, got them all installed. Doing the demo, two of the guys with the biggest mouthpieces 11 years ago about this are standing there going, gee, these things are great. These are great. Oh my God. Oh. I looked right at him and I said, well, we could have had them 11 years ago if you didn't complain about it. He goes, yeah, I don't even know why. I don't know. And that, I mean, everybody in this room's got to, that's what we do as firefighters, right? We complain and complain. For a profession that is rated so high in job satisfaction, I have never met a group of people that complain so much. Right? But the point is, I'm not picking the stretcher. I'm not using it. You pick. We had to go out and buy some other things. I look at the union, I say, laptops, when we had to go computer generated. We went to the tough books. The price of the tough books went crazy. So I went to the union, I said, listen, I want to explore some cheaper option. I think there's some decent things that are out there. I said, put a committee together. Let's trial run some, let me know. They did that. At the end of the day, they came back. Tough books it is. Okay, we tried, so we're still buying tough books. Now, do I have the authority to say, I'm not buying tough books anymore, and we're putting Lenovo ThinkPads in the ambulances, and that's what we're doing, end of discussion. Do I have the authority and the ability to do that? Yes, I do. Does that serve any purpose for me moving the agency forward and building relationships in the future? It does not. Okay? As chief officers, know your role, know what's in your wheelhouse, know what decisions you should be making and what decisions you shouldn't be making. And it's real simple. If it's not something that you're going to use in the performance of your job, then you probably shouldn't be making the decision on what it is. Now, there's budget constraints, all of those kind of things. But if it's within the budget and it's what the staff wants, let them make that decision. Company officers, same thing. If there's an opportunity that you have for your firefighters to make a decision on a piece of equipment that's going to be on the truck, and at the end of the day, it's really no sweat off of you, and that's what you're going to push forward to them, then do it. if that's what they want. Listen to your staff. We have some very bright people working for us in our agencies who have good and thoughtful ideas, and they don't necessarily need to have a bugle on them in order to have a seat at the table. And I've had this conversation with many, many chiefs who still kind of operate in this vacuum that they're the chiefs and they're making the decisions. And I look at them and and some of them are good friends of mine, and I shake my head and I said, you're on the wrong road, man. You're on the wrong road. Because when you look at your agency, you look at some of the troubles that you have in your agency, it's largely because you don't listen to your people. All right? Equal treatment and discipline for all members. Anybody ever been faced with this one? Right? This happens a lot. Favoritism kicks in at the company level. Favoritism even kicks in at the chief level sometimes. Right? Two parties, equal or similar offenses, two completely different rulings. Right? What kind of message does that send across the organization? That there's favorites, right? That there's a clique or a club. You lose credibility. When those kind of things happen, you lose credibility as a leader. Equal treatment and discipline for all members across the board. Advocate for training and equipment, not only at the company level, but at the chief level. And when I say advocate for training and equipment, we also have to understand and recognize that there are budgetary constraints to this, right? You can't just walk in and say, Chief, we need a new truck. And then expect that the chief's going to go to City Hall and say, Mayor, we need a new truck. And then we're going to come back and say, all right, guys, I handed that one out by lunch, we got a new truck, right? That's not realistic. And I think the majority of our firefighters, they know that, and they understand that. But again, do you know how many company officers and chiefs that I know that when their staff is talking, they're not listening to them, and they're not even advocating for the training and equipment? Okay? What does advocate mean? Does advocate necessarily equal success at the end? No. So understand and recognize that there's a difference. I can advocate for something even though I may know deep down in my heart of hearts that we're not going to get it. Or that it's going to be a considerable amount of time off, a time away. Maybe it's a 5-year project or something like that. I'm dealing with something very similar right now with an expansion renovation of both of our facilities. I'm pretty close to getting a commitment out of the manager's office that we're going to see maybe shovel in the ground in 5 years. But it's been 2 years that I've been advocating for that project. And even though we don't have the commitment and we're still 5 years out, do you think I've heard any complaining in the organization that we don't have a shovel in the ground yet? Very little, because they know I'm advocating. They know I'm talking. They know I'm up there. They know that I'm not being silent on the issue. I'm making our issues known. I'm making our needs known. And they know that. And they appreciate that. And we have conversations about that. So I'm not finding a whole lot of conversation around the kitchen table complaining that we don't have an expansion renovation yet, or that there's no plans or talk about it. Because it's out there, it's visible that it's happening. Same thing at the company level. If the saw on your truck won't start 9 times out of 10, and you need a new saw, if you're just looking at your crew saying, we don't have any money for a saw, is that going to get old quick? Yeah. Now, maybe you're going to go to the chief and say, saw won't start, and the chief says, no money for a saw. It gives you the ability to go back to the company and say, I spoke to the chief about the saw, we don't have any money right now, but he's going to look into it, we're working on it, I get it. Do you think the crew's going to appreciate that you're advocating? Yeah, they will. Same thing with training and equipment, right? If there's a need within the organization, that need needs to be known. And I don't, and that's something that I talk about all the time within my agency. If there is a need in this organization, we need to know about it, and I don't care who it comes from. I want it to go through the chain of command because I can't have 45 people knocking on my door every day. But if there's a need in the organization, I want to know about it, and I don't care whose idea it was. I want to know whose idea it was because I want to give you credit for it. But we have to know what's going on. We have to know what the needs are in the organization. Do we have any hopes or chance of getting better if we're ignoring what the needs of our agencies are? No, absolutely not. Encourage employees and assist them with their goals, right? It's what I'm doing now with my officers, trying to get them officer designee status through CPSE. I'm working with them. I'm working with them on their technical competencies and, trying to figure out, all right, what training sessions, would be helpful, for the application and where are we going? I have my deputy chief just graduated with his master's degree. I'm so proud of him. He's been working a long time, last 3 years to get that. One of my captains has been plugging along. He's got a couple kids and he's been plugging along part-time. He's just about to finish his associates. He's graduating in May and he's already enrolled in his bachelor's program, right? These are things that we're talking about in the agency, encouraging them to move further, encouraging them to get better, assisting them when I can in meeting their goals, right? That will pay off for you huge as a company officer or as a chief when your people truly believe that you care about them. Not just a facade, not a show, because they'll see through that. But if you truly care about your people and you help them achieve what it is that they're looking to do, they'll go to the end of the earth for you. And you know that. That's in our nature as firefighters. If we believe that someone truly respects the effort that we put in and have helped us get there, again, they'll go to the end of the earth for you. Be honest. I can't stress this one enough. You only have to lie once or mislead an employee once and your credibility is done. We don't forget much. Again, it's an amazing ability that firefighters have. We forgot to do the checklist this morning, but I remember exactly what you said to me 22 years ago when we were standing right here when you denied my vacation request, right? We have very long memories, all right? And again, it's a credibility issue. People do not want to work for liars. People do not want to work for people who mislead, and people do not want to work for people that they don't trust. And when you're the chief of an organization, a deputy, a battalion chief, company officer, even a firefighter, we all in the organization have to know and understand that we have to trust each other at all levels. Right? And it's more critical when we are in a supervisory capacity. Recognize, encourage initiative, and motivation of members. If people are doing a good job, tell them they're doing a good job. If people are going out of the way to do something that they weren't asked, recognize it. Again, we talked about this in the very beginning. Everybody wants a pat on the back. Everybody wants to be recognized for their efforts. And it's our job as company officers, it's our job as chiefs to point that stuff out. Anybody here ever heard of management by walking around? I love management by walking around. It keeps me intact with what's going on the floor, right? But I love doing the management by walking around when I know that there's something going on out of the floor. It gives me an opportunity to talk to people, catch up, not only what's going on in their personal life, but their professional life. But you know what? We spend, I think, way too much time in this job, on occasion, trying to catch people doing something bad. Why don't we try to catch people doing something good? And I love catching people doing something good. And I always and consistently make sure that I point it out. There's a lot of great things going on in my agency, just as I'm confident and sure that there's a lot of great things going on in your agency. So if there's a lot of great things going on in your agency, somebody's behind the wheel of those initiatives. Have we thanked them lately? Have we recognized their efforts? Right? We have an obligation to do that as supervisors and leaders. And the last one, communicate effectively from the top to the bottom. This was the number 2 complaint, right outside of listening to your staff. The number 2 complaint was lack of communication in the organization. You know, and people just, going off about, we have no idea what's going on, and, this showed up the other day, and that showed up the other, everybody complaining that no one knows what's going on. Again, in 2017, in today's world, if we're still struggling as an organization with a lack of communication, with all of the technology that we have available to us, there's a problem, right? Between email, text messages, carrier pigeon, I don't care how you choose to do it, right? But in today's world, with all of the technology that we have in front of us, we should not still be struggling with communication issues within the organization. The organization that I worked for prior to going to Auburn, again, I served as a captain, and we would have officers meetings, and we got locked down in a little room, and we didn't have written agendas because the agenda might leak, and then we'd talk about everything, and then every meeting we were told when we leave here that this was private and don't talk about it. And fundamentally, I never could wrap my head around that, because we just spent 2 hours talking about all of these initiatives that we want to do within the organization, and all of these new rules and policies that we want implemented. But we're going to leave the office and not tell anybody about what it is that we want them to do. And then 3 weeks later, when they didn't do what it was that we discussed in the officers meeting, then we would yell at them because they didn't do what it was. And people would say, well, we didn't know that, right? Everything that happened in the officers meeting was the greatest kept secret in the world, and I never understood it. And it was one of the things that when I went to Auburn, I changed as deputy in charge of operations. I said, okay, when we have our staff meeting, we're going to do minutes of the meeting, and within 24 hours of the officers meeting, we're going to distribute via email the minutes of the officers meeting out to everybody so they know what we talked about, and they know what the outcomes were, and they know what new policy initiatives are coming, and all of that stuff. Because the reality is that nothing that we're talking about in that room is a secret, or should be a secret. And if it is, you probably shouldn't be talking about it in the officers meeting. Because the only thing that really should be a secret in the organization is personnel issues, and the personnel issues shouldn't be discussed at staff meetings. So can someone please, right now, give me an example of something that we may talk about in a staff meeting that the rest of our staff ultimately shouldn't know about at the end of the day? Because I can't think of one, right? But are we sharing that information, or are we treating our staff meetings like it's the greatest kept secret in the world? Our staff has to know what's going on. They have to understand policy initiatives. They have to understand, more importantly, where are we going? Where are we going as an agency? And think about that for a minute, especially as you leave this conference after this week. Does your agency really know where you're going? Have you communicated effectively to your organization what your vision is? What your future plans are for the organization? Have they been involved in those conversations? Again, do you think it's easier for your department as a whole to ultimately get to the end, to the finish line where you want to be together, or separate? Which do you think? Together, right? So how do we get to the finish line together if they don't know where you're going? So think about that as you leave the conference. Have you communicated the vision? We all know what the mission is. Hopefully they know what the mission is. But have you articulated the vision of the organization to the members so they understand where you're going? And again, if new equipment's coming, if we change locations of this or we change locations of that, look at the way that you communicate in your organization. And again, should this be something that you're figuring out on your own? Here's a thought. Look at the department and say, how would you like the administration to communicate with you about the things that are important for you to know about? And how about you let them tell you what that medium is? So we know that we're using the right one. We know that we're using a method in which is acceptable to them and easy for them. We don't have to make as leaders every decision. Are we responsible for those decisions? Absolutely. But we have to delegate some stuff. Otherwise, we're gonna cripple ourselves. We're not gonna be effective. And we have to really look at the decisions that we're making and think, should I be making this decision? And again, if it's a decision that's going to affect the department as a whole, and again, a decision that at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter to you how you push the information out, maybe it's not a decision you should be making alone. Ask someone else. Ask the staff. Get their feedback. Listen to them. Things go a lot smoother that way. Are there any questions or comments on anything that we talked about today? None? I have some cards up here if anybody wants a card. I'll be sticking around for a little bit if anybody wanted to talk privately or has anything. Again, I really appreciate you taking your morning to spend some time with me. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Have a great day. Thank you very much.